The night seemed ordinary, the kind of uneventful shift police officers often dreaded. The roads were mostly clear, the town quiet, and the air unusually still. Two patrol officers cruised through the suburban streets, their headlights cutting across patches of darkness where street lamps had burned out. Then, just after midnight, their attention was caught by a gray sedan ahead of them. Its left taillight was cracked and barely glowing, and the car drifted ever so slightly across the center line. It wasn't enough to suggest reckless driving, but it was enough to justify a traffic stop. The officers exchanged a glance, flipped on their cruiser's lights, and signaled for the vehicle to pull over. The sedan rolled to a halt near the curb, its brake lights glowing faintly in the silence of the night. As the officers approached, they noticed the driver, a woman in her early 40s, lowering her window. Her face was composed, her eyes fixed forward as though she had been preparing for this exact moment. When asked for her license and registration, she produced them quickly, her hands steady, her voice measured. To an untrained eye, she might have appeared cooperative, but seasoned officers had instincts that warned them when something wasn't right. There was no nervous fumbling, no excuses, no casual chatter. She seemed calm in a way that didn't fit the situation. One of the officers leaned slightly closer to the open window. That's when he noticed it. A faint chemical odor, sharp and unsettling, lingering inside the car. It wasn't the smell of alcohol, nor was it the faint trace of marijuana they had encountered countless times before. This was different, industrial almost, the kind of smell that clung to the air and made the skin prickle. When questioned about her destination, the woman gave vague answers, stating she was simply on her way home. Her tone was flat, rehearsed, almost mechanical. The officers stepped back, quietly debating their next move. Legally, they had reason to investigate further. The broken taillight was only a minor issue, but combined with her unusual composure and the strange odor, it raised enough suspicion to warrant a search. They informed the woman that they needed to take a look inside the vehicle. She nodded without resistance, showing neither protest nor fear. It was as though she had anticipated this request and had already accepted what was about to happen. As one officer guided her to step out of the vehicle, the other circled around to inspect the car. The seats were clean, almost spotless, with nothing unusual visible in the front or back. But when he reached the trunk, he noticed a detail that set his nerves on edge. Faint streaks of something dark near the latch, as if it had been forced shut over a heavy load. He gestured for his partner, and together they prepared to open it. Their hands hesitated for just a moment, the silence of the street pressing down on them. What lay inside was unknown, but every instinct told them it would be nothing ordinary. With a click, the trunk released, and the lid began to rise. The beam of a flashlight cut into the darkness, revealing a shape that made both officers' stomachs tighten. The night that had begun as routine had just taken a turn they would never forget. The trunk creaked open slowly, the hinges stiff, as though it had not been opened for days. A thick heaviness seemed to hang in the air, and even before the beam of the flashlight revealed the interior, both officers felt an instinctive dread. The light caught on the plastic wrapping first. Two large shapes tightly bound, stacked neatly side by side, as if someone had tried to organize the unthinkable. The outlines were unmistakable. These were not bundles of clothes or tools. They were human forms, motionless and cold. For a moment, the street fell into silence, broken only by the faint hum of the cruiser's engine. It was the kind of silence that demanded breath be held, as though sound itself would disturb the horrifying stillness of the scene. The bodies were wrapped with precision, layers of clear plastic wound, tightly from head to toe. The material clung to every contour, leaving no doubt about what lay underneath. The light reflected off the plastic in a way that made the shapes look almost sculpted. Yet the faint discoloration beneath told a far darker story. The smell that had been faint inside the car now hit them with full force, an acrid mix of chemicals and the sickly sweet odor of decay. The officers recoiled, their minds racing to comprehend how a traffic stop had led to this grotesque discovery. Training took over even as their instincts screamed, and they quickly secured the woman, placing her under arrest while she remained unnervingly still, her expression unreadable. She didn't argue, didn't plead, didn't even blink in confusion. Her composure only deepened the sense of unease, as though she had already played this moment out in her head and accepted its inevitability. Other patrol cars were called in, their sirens breaking the eerie calm as they converged on the scene. Flashing lights painted the neighborhood in red and blue, drawing curious onlookers who had no idea what horror was unfolding just a few feet away. Detectives arrived quickly, setting up a perimeter around the vehicle. Forensic teams donned gloves and masks, approaching the trunk with a mix of caution and grim determination. The bodies were carefully documented, photographed from every angle before being lifted out. Each layer of plastic was cut with surgical precision, revealing the pale, lifeless faces of two men. Their identities were not immediately known, but the condition of their bodies suggested they had been dead for some time. Bruises, bindings, and markings hinted at violence, though the full story of how they died remained hidden beneath the surface. News spread through the department like wildfire. What began as a simple traffic violation had spiraled into one of the most shocking cases the small town had ever seen. Reporters swarmed the area within hours, cameras flashing as investigators worked through the night. The street, once ordinary, was transformed into a crime scene etched into memory. The woman sat quietly in the back of a patrol car, her hands cuffed, her gaze fixed on the ground. To those watching, she looked less like someone caught off guard and more like someone who had been waiting for this moment, as if discovery had always been part of her plan. For the officers who opened that trunk, the memory would never fade. What they found was not just evidence of murder, but a door into something far darker, a secret life that had been hiding in plain sight. And with every hour that passed, it became clear that the bodies in the trunk were only the beginning of a far more sinister story. The victims were identified within days, and their names sent ripples through the community. Both were men in their 30s, known locally, but not tied to each other in any significant way. One had been a construction worker who lived on the edge of town, the other a warehouse employee from a nearby district. They came from different circles, had no overlapping friends, and yet both had vanished weeks earlier under eerily similar circumstances. Families had filed missing persons reports, but with little evidence and no leads, the cases had quietly stalled. Now, their final resting place had been discovered in the trunk of a stranger's car. Detectives pieced together their last known movements. Surveillance footage from a downtown bar became the first breakthrough. The first victim had been captured on camera leaving the establishment just after midnight, stumbling slightly from drinks, heading into the dark parking lot. Weeks later, the second victim had done the same, leaving that very same bar under nearly identical circumstances. In both cases, the woman with the gray sedan had been there, sitting quietly near the exit, a presence unnoticed at the time, but now impossible to ignore. She never spoke to the victims on camera, never made obvious contact, but her gaze seemed fixed, tracking them as they walked away. Witnesses recalled seeing her vehicle idling nearby on both nights. At the time, no one thought much of it. A lone driver in a parked car hardly seemed unusual. But as investigators reconstructed the timeline, it became chillingly clear that the disappearances had been anything but random. The bar had served as a hunting ground, a place where she could select targets, wait patiently, and follow them into the night when their defenses were lowered. The precision of it all struck detectives as deliberate, calculated, and practiced. Autopsy reports added further layers of dread. Both men bore marks on their wrists and ankles, suggesting they had been restrained. Traces of a powerful sedative were found in their systems, hinting that they had been drugged before their deaths. The cause of death was listed as asphyxiation, their final moments stolen in silence. The similarities between the two murders erased any doubt that this was the work of a single orchestrator. The woman was no accidental killer. She was methodical, and her victims had been chosen with intent. Still, one question remained unanswered. Why these men? They had no ties to her, no shared history, no grudges that could explain the violence. Detectives dug into their backgrounds, searching for hidden connections. What they found instead was an emerging pattern. Both men had lived alone with minimal family nearby. Both had jobs that kept them late into the night, ensuring they were easy to isolate, and both had routines that made them predictable. It seemed less about who they were and more about how vulnerable they could be made to look. As the picture sharpened, investigators realized they weren't just dealing with two murders. They were looking at the habits of a predator who had studied her victims and exploited their weaknesses. Each detail fit together too neatly, leaving a haunting conclusion. These men had not been chosen at random. They had been stalked, selected, and silenced by someone who planned every move in advance. The grisly truth was beginning to unfold, but the answers only led to darker questions about how many more might have disappeared the same way, unseen and unmissed until now. The investigation into the woman's life began with what seemed like an ordinary profile. She was a single resident of a modest home in a quiet neighborhood, working a part-time job at a small bookstore. To those who knew her in passing, she seemed polite, always greeting neighbors with a nod or a faint smile. She kept her yard tidy, drove the same car for years, and lived without drawing attention. On the surface, she blended into the fabric of the town without raising suspicion. Yet as detectives dug deeper, the carefully maintained image began to unravel, revealing a hidden life of secrecy and disturbing obsession. Financial records were the first red flag. Over the past year, she had withdrawn thousands of dollars in cash at irregular intervals, money that could not be traced to any large purchases or bills. Store receipts revealed something stranger still: repeated transactions for cleaning chemicals, industrial strength gloves, rolls of plastic sheeting, and lengths of rope. Taken individually, these items could have been harmless. Together, they painted a chilling picture of preparation. She had been quietly stockpiling tools that could be used to capture, restrain, and conceal. It was no accident, it was a system. Her neighbors, when questioned, provided fragmented impressions that only deepened the mystery. They described her as private, never inviting visitors, and rarely seen speaking to anyone. At times, they noticed the faint sound of hammering or dragging noises late at night, but had dismissed it as home repairs. Packages were delivered frequently to her door, yet she always retrieved them quickly, as though eager to hide their contents. The most unsettling detail came from a delivery driver who recalled seeing her carry a heavy bag into her basement, straining under its weight. He remembered it because she gave a small smile before shutting the door in silence, leaving him with an unexplainable chill. The breakthrough came when detectives obtained a warrant to search her property. The basement was locked with multiple bolts, as if she wanted to ensure no one could enter without force. Inside, investigators found what they would later describe as a private chamber of obsession. Journals filled with dense handwriting covered shelves along the walls. Page after page detailed her thoughts, her methods, and her philosophy. She referred to her crimes as experiments, writing about them in detached, clinical language. Each entry described the process of selecting, observing, and controlling her targets. She spoke of her need to measure fear, to understand silence, to test how long she could keep her captives hidden from the world. Among the writings were names, lists of potential subjects, some marked with symbols, others crossed out. Chillingly, several of these names matched individuals reported missing in nearby towns over the last 2 years. Photographs were also discovered showing people leaving bars, walking down streets, or simply standing at bus stops, all taken from a distance. They were her trophies, her catalog of potential victims. The revelation transformed the investigation. What had first appeared to be the work of an isolated killer now looked like part of a much larger pattern. The basement had become a window into her true nature, exposing a mind consumed not by impulse but by obsession. The woman who once seemed invisible in her community had been hiding in plain sight, carefully balancing two lives, one of ordinary politeness, the other of meticulous cruelty. For detectives, the chilling thought was clear. What they had discovered so far might only scratch the surface of what she had been doing all along. The evidence against the woman seemed overwhelming. The bodies in the trunk, the journals in her basement, the surveillance footage placing her near the victims, all of it pointed to her as the architect of a carefully planned series of crimes. Detectives prepared to charge her with multiple counts of murder, confident the case would hold in court. Yet when forensic reports returned, a new and disturbing detail shifted the investigation in an unexpected direction. Samples taken from beneath the victim's fingernails and from fibers on the plastic wrapping contained DNA that did not belong to her. It belonged to someone else entirely, someone still unidentified. This revelation changed the narrative. She was no longer viewed as a solitary predator, but as part of a pair. The idea of an accomplice was chilling, suggesting coordination, shared intent, and perhaps even a division of roles. Investigators speculated that the woman may not have been the one who overpowered the victims, but rather the planner, while someone else carried out the physical acts of restraint. The unknown DNA was proof that another figure lurked behind the curtain, someone who might still be moving freely in the community. Detectives retraced the timeline of the victims' disappearances, looking for signs of another presence. Surveillance footage from one of the bar parking lots revealed a faint shadow in the distance, a second car parked across the street with headlights briefly flashing before being turned off. Witnesses who had previously been overlooked now recalled seeing a tall figure standing near the alley as the victims left, though no one could describe the face. The puzzle pieces suggested a partnership, one that thrived in secrecy, where each played a distinct role to avoid suspicion. The journals offered more unsettling clues. Among the lists of names and detailed entries, there were cryptic references to a we instead of I. One passage read like a message to someone else. Our timing must remain perfect. One mistake and the game ends. Another entry ended with the words, he waits outside patient while I guide them in. These fragments hinted at coordination, but never directly identified who the partner was. For investigators, it was both frustrating and terrifying. If she had an accomplice, it meant there was someone else out there, capable of continuing the crimes without her. The woman remained silent through interrogations, refusing to answer questions about anyone else. Her calm demeanor never wavered, even as detectives pressed her with the forensic evidence. It was as if she drew satisfaction from knowing a piece of the truth remained beyond their reach. Her refusal left investigators with only speculation, forcing them to consider whether her partner was a lover, a friend, or someone she had manipulated into becoming part of her dark rituals. As the case moved toward trial, law enforcement launched a parallel investigation to track down the unknown DNA match. The community, once reassured by her arrest, began to panic again as news spread of a possible accomplice. People feared another abduction, another disappearance, another name added to the grim list she had left behind. What started as a routine traffic stop had become more than a murder case. It had become the opening chapter in a larger manhunt. The woman was behind bars, but the shadow of her partner still lingered, a threat that had not yet been unmasked. The chilling reality settled in. The story was far from over.